I'm Matt Barry. I'm an independent filmmaker, and this is Low Budget Visions, where we're celebrating personal, independent DIY filmmaking. And I have the pleasure of being joined today by Jake Binstock, another independent filmmaker and director of the upcoming feature film, The Wasps. And Jake, I wanted to talk with you about this film because I was really struck by what a unique movie it is visually, the subject, the approach that you took with it. And I was hoping that to start with, you could talk a little bit about how this came to be. You can talk about the genesis of the project itself and sort of what led you to it.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Matt. I'd always been a big fan of the classics, ancient Greek literature, Homer, all of that. And I first moved to Austin, where I made the film. It took me a long time to get a job and to get work and to start gigging, in the film scene out there. So basically, I got there, and for 2 months straight, I just read ancient Greek literature, and I fell in love with the Athenian playwrights. Starting with Aeschylus, and then kind of eventually till I found Aristophanes, who is the playwright that this film's based on, The Wasps. And that kind of was just in the back of my head for a lot of years, these are just great plays, and I don't know why. I want people to see what I see in these plays. A lot of it's considered very stuffy, ancient literature, which is fair, but I don't know, there was something immediate about all of it that really spoke to me. And it was always in the back of my head that this would be one of these plays would be cool to adapt. And so at the time I was working on this big, ambitious nightmare comedy film that me and my co-director and co-writer were working on at the time. And we got the script to a point that we felt really good about. We got a lot of people involved. And we got our mentor, Richard Linklater, attached to be a part of the film, and basically just hustled that for a year or two. And the problem was it was like a $2 or $3 million ambitious project, and we were just a couple of 22-year-olds who had never made anything beyond high school films, backyard stuff, backyard movies, college films, student films. So for all the momentum we were able to get with that previous project, we just couldn't get the financing together. It was completely out of reach. So we sort of went back to the drawing board, and we're like, well, what's the next move? We're getting to be close to Orson Welles' age when he did his first feature. We wanted to do a feature in high school, but couldn't get that off the ground. So, for us, the internal clock was really ticking, which is funny to think about that. But, so we kind of were like, well, we don't want to spend another year and a half writing the masterpiece screenplay and then spend another year getting the financing and yada, yada, yada. So we wanted something now. And that was when I kind of had the thought, what about these Greek plays? The casts are 10 to 15 people. It's one location always. They're short. Why don't we look into that? So we we went back to the drawing board. We looked through all the plays again together and ultimately settled on The Wasps. And we shot it in our backyard.
Nice.
We looked at looking at the backyard, was like, well, this is sort of a rustic villa.
Yeah.
Let's find one of these plays that take place in the backyard of an Athenian villa. And The Wasps lined up, and it also was really kind of lined up well with the sort of thematic ideas, that had been really on my mind and my co-director's mind. And that was kind of just how The Wasps started.
That's great to hear, because it sounds like what you effectively did was looked at what you had, looked at these source materials that you wanted to make, the kind of thing that was inspiring you. But it sounds like you were really looking at, what do I have? What can we realistically do within, within these resources? And then out of that came this unique project. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I think we, initially had the mind of we'll do this no matter what. Whatever
Yeah.
we have, if we've got, if we know we'll get 5,000 from this one, cousin or uncle, we're going to do it for 5,000, period. Even if it means there's no production design, it's just all of us are starring in it, smash and grab. But, we were able to put together a little bit, still extremely micro budget, extremely DIY, but we were able to kind of get a crew together and get some nice equipment and cast it, non-union, but still kind of really get a solid ensemble cast as opposed to just doing it rough and tumble. But
well, having seen the film, I have to say I think you got the most out of your budget, because it's visually it's a very it's a splendid film. I mean, I think the production design really works. It doesn't. As I was watching it, I didn't feel like there were obvious limitations on the screen. I felt like this is a film that really got the most out of its budget. Yeah.
I think it helped being based on the play, so like we could kind of lean into some of the theatrical, campier sort of elements,
Right.
and work that into the production design. I think that helped, but yeah, that was probably the hardest part. The most ridiculously ambitious part of the movie is trying to get a period piece to
Right.
look at least something, and there were a number of ways where we stretched the budget there.
Well, on that note, could you talk a little bit about the process of adapting the Wasps? I mean, like you said, you kind of at one level go very close to the theatrical roots, but at the same time, I think you bring in a lot of very cinematic elements, even some of the silent film clips. I think I saw a clip from the Rescue from an Eagle's Nest, the early
Yeah.
biograph film in there. Yeah,
Good call.
I love seeing that kind of thing.
Good call.
Yeah.
Wow.
So if you have, anyway, if you could talk a little bit about just the process of adaptation, and I guess how you visualize taking the original source play and bringing in these different kind of elements.
Yeah, so, around the time that our big budget project was sort of, stalling, and I was kind of thinking about these plays. That was when Joel Cohen's Macbeth was released, and I had never really been one for Shakespeare, but that film really grabbed me, and immediately afterwards I read the play, and I guess I kind of finally understood Shakespeare, but that's a different conversation. I think what really struck me was how exact the adaptation was. I mean, it is almost word for word the original play, and there's a lot of creative reorganization of certain details, and just a lot of interesting little touches by having a certain actor play two roles and kind of give another role and different context, and kind of putting other characters in scenes where they don't have any lines to sort of create these really interesting dynamics that are purely off the page and without having to change a word. And that blew me away, and so that kind of made me want to take the approach of sticking to the original text as tightly as possible. And it's the original plays in Greek, so it's not like we could do it word for word. It's an English language film, but there was this sort of lineage of British translations that stretched back to around 1900, and between 1900 and in the 40s. And so that was kind of our main jumping off point, was to keep it as tight to this language as possible. And things evolve as it comes to life. There were a lot of time. There was moments where we had to make huge cuts and slash out a lot and sort of massage the British slang to sort of American slang, and during the process of rehearsals you sort of shape the dialogue as best you can to what's natural for the actors, so things take shape in that kind of way. But basically, it's an abridged version of the play. I mean, there was a lot of creative deletion. There's a whole scene in the original play that we scrapped, mostly because it wouldn't have been feasible to shoot that scene, but also it didn't make sense like cinematically. It didn't make sense. So in terms of the narrative of like the trajectory of the characters and the relationships, there was one massive scene that didn't do anything. So we just excised the whole thing. But there isn't much that really, changed, and the process of something early on, one of my oldest film mentors, who's the guy that got me into film, he's in the movie. He's one of the chorus members. He's my dad's high school friend. He is someone who I have consulted on all my projects since I was like 12. He read the play when I first told him about this idea. He read the translation and said, Jake, there's 50, 60 footnotes. Like, how do you expect anyone to understand this? That was where the idea of, some of the obscure references, we could just pop a footnote on the bottom of the frame and have it kind of lean into that sort of literary sensibility.
Right.
And also just kind of focusing it on the relationship dynamics. I mean, it's a very political text, which is something that I think helped in terms of sort of paralleling it to modern day politics. Mm-hmm. But I think what cuts through is the human drama. Yeah. I mean, anyone can understand a relationship between a father and a son. So that was sort of just trying to get the emphasis there, the subtext there, as best as possible. And then it was just a constant revision every day. For hours throughout pre-production. We'd spend a chunk of the day working on just getting the text as tight as possible, and anything that was just too dense in terms of references or finding a way to sort of make things concise and consistent and clean.
Well, you mentioned Joel Cohen's Macbeth as one of the influences, kind of one of the models that you were looking at in conceptualizing this film. Are there any other particular stylistic influences, either from film or other arts that you were drawing on?
Yeah, for sure. It's black and white and 4:3. That was actually some of the last creative decisions made. I mean, when we went into production, that was set. It was black and white and 4:3. But initially, we weren't wanting that look, really. It was a big key influence, I would say, is the Decameron, Pasolini's, Pier Paolo Pasolini's The Decameron. Especially, the content, the sense of humor, a lot of like fart and sex jokes. And we kind of wanted this sort of like, sleazy Italian look.
Right.
So originally it was like, it'll be kind of a wider screen look, color, sort of shaky. But I think as we sort of worked the material and rehearsed with the actors, we realized, okay, this is much more, campy and goofy and isn't and with, how it's a play on a stage, essentially.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to go for a natural look. So it kind of just naturally drifted into sort of a more theatrical kind of like old Hollywood lighting. Lockdown on sticks, very little camera movement, a lot of sort of long takes to give it an older, slower sensibility. But I mean, the text, it was, David Barrett's translation. That's the main thing that we wanted to look at, and we weren't really looking at a lot of films during pre-production. We kind of just tried to have the film enter a universe of its own. Now, I can't speak to whether we succeeded or not, but that was sort of the philosophical approach, was to try to make this its own world, its own universe. But yeah, I mean, we weren't the first to do these adaptations. I mean, I think there's a lot of other little things that sort of are in my DNA as a filmmaker that I can't shake, that I think course through the work. You know, the Coen brothers, obviously, but like John Waters, sort of campy bad taste. The highbrow, lowbrow always really interested me.
Yeah, it's interesting you
so
mentioned
that's there.
him and Pasolini both. I see now that you mentioned the Cameron and I can kind of see that in the film. I watched that film within the last few years. Enjoyed it quite a bit, and a lot of those qualities that you're describing, I think, do come through in your film. So
That's good.
I'd say that's a success. Yeah, I think it's also interesting that you're drawing on these kind of literary, theatrical influences, and that's something that I think, again, it very much comes through. It gives this film that kind of unique quality that I was, as I was saying earlier, and it's something that I think so many films draw seemingly only on cinematic influences, and sometimes it can become sort of it can get kind of repetitious, seeing certain similar influences in film after film. So I think that you're drawing on these other traditions, literary and theatrical, really bring a lot to this. Really, really made it, again, there's that word, unique.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. A big thing too that I didn't mention. I mean, well, it's a musical. I'm a
Right,
big,
yeah.
and I love old Hollywood musicals.
Oh yeah, can
Singing
you
in
talk
the
a little?
Rain,
Yeah, I was.
Wizard of Oz. These
Yeah.
are all some of my all-time favorite films. So that was just the idea of like bringing the chorus to life and having them kind of begin and end scenes and musical interludes, and the silent film aspect too. Me and my co-director were huge silent film lovers. And that was sort of another thing that really kind of started to enter the piece in post-production mostly. I mean, there's a lot of humor stems from silent film to old Hollywood, so there's that, but kind of messing with the frame rates and
Yeah.
kind of leaning into silent film score and using archival silent films, like you were saying, Rescue from an Eagle's Nest, kind of, and when you enter their dreams of the characters, they're in silent film. I think being an adaptation of an ancient film and kind of like an homage to the history of storytelling, both theatrical but film especially, and how that's really just kind of an extension of the theatrical arts, and it's kind of just we wanted it to be sort of the send up of the history of storytelling,
Right, yeah.
in the most ambitious sense of thinking about the film. So yeah, that's how it kind of the post production, the editing process, sort of those ideas started to creep in, and also at that time, because we were sort of trying to stylistically edit it in more of like a slower, rhythmic, silent, older style, as opposed to like cut, just kind of let the takes play out. I was watching a lot of early silent cinema. I was kind of looking at those 1-2 reel Chaplin films.
Oh yeah.
That I hadn't seen, like Shoulder Arms and some of those earlier ones, 19 Teens, and then also just kind of looking at Harold Lloyd and Buster Keaton and Fatty Arbuckle, and even going all the way to D.W. Griffith's early stuff where he was just acting. We kind of we watched Intolerance for the first time. That was a big hole in my viewership. So that was and that kind of led to Rescue to an Eagle's Nest. And there's also this sort of eagle-hawk metaphor about Cleon, who's the political figure that the film sort of swirls around. And so he rescued from an eagle's nest, and then kind of the dream, talking to how the characters at the beginning talk about their dreams of eagles, and they tie it into Cleon. It was kind of like these things sort of just fell into place.
Yes, yeah. It's interesting that you bring the early film clip in specifically with the dreams and tying them into the idea of dreams, because I think there is something about these kind of uncanny flickering images, and also especially with Rescue from an Eagle's Nest. I mean, just that image of that eagle carrying the baby through the air, it almost takes on a kind of surrealistic, nightmarish kind of quality, I guess.
Yeah, that's one of the great cinematic images.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it has. It's interesting for a couple of reasons, because it's just such it's such a memorable, just the image of the eagle with that baby, but also there's that kind of uncanny, that painted, the painted backdrop moving behind it, just this sort of artificial motion of that stuffed eagle's wings moving, and yeah, it there's something uncanny and dreamlike about it. There's a kind of strangeness to it, I think, that brings it into the dream realm. So I found that connection that you made fascinating. I found that fascinating, and also I have to just add on a personal note, the black and white cinematography, very rich, the lighting was very almost expressionistic in times. It reminded me of kind of the German expressionist films a bit, some of the later silence, just the really strong use of light and shadow.
That's a generous compliment. I mean, that you got to give that credit to our cinematographer. I mean, the DP that we were able to find, he's incredible. He does great work.
Yeah.
And a lot of that look, we wouldn't have been able to achieve without him. He kind of, I think, you want to, as best as you can, surround yourself with people that can take your film to the next level. That's something I learned a lot in the process of making this, is having a great DP who understands lighting, has a really good kid who knows how to, lead a G&E team. I wouldn't have known any. I mean, I think I learned a lot watching him, and I mean, there were things being thrown around, things that were going on that I had no idea was happening,
right.
And then I just look at the monitor and I'm like, holy shit! Sorry, can I?
Oh yeah, please. Yeah,
sorry, holy shit!
Yeah.
That's incredible. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it's like, how do you want to allocate your money that you have, especially at this level? It's like, well, the pie chart of the money we have is so small that you gotta find how to, leverage that as best as you can. And I mean, a lot of it's personal connections. And so, yeah, we were able to get some great lighting equipment, and, our DP, Ben, is phenomenal, and the gaffers he was able to bring on were great, and we had a great grip team. We had a great key grip, Bayo, who really just held it down. And it really just, was able to bring all that production design to work, to life. So yeah, I mean, and a lot of it's prep too. Like, we had sort of prepped every single shot, every single framing. Because we shot it in our backyard, we were able to, block the entire film ahead of time.
Oh yeah.
And frame every single setup ahead of time. And, before we entered production, our time was so tight. We only had 10 days to shoot a feature film, which is real Poverty Row, old Hollywood.
Right, yeah.
So the only way we were able to do that, I think, was by having every single shot planned out and having our actors rehearse for 6 weeks. So where they were basically there by the time we were picture up, take one. They knew they were in the ballpark, and we knew what we wanted. And just kind of feeling it out from there. But yeah, the look is totally collaborative. And I was not the director of photography. You got to give that credit to the DPs and what they do. That's a hard art.
Well, like you said, though, having a team there, people you trust, people who know what they're doing, people who are on board, who share the vision, who are on your same creative wavelength. I think that is so crucial. That's something I would always say to, a young filmmaker or any, filmmaker of any age starting out for the first time, is to really try to build those teams with people that you trust and who aren't going to people who are going to help support the vision as opposed to kind of resisting it or challenging it, along the way. Because I think it really shows in a film like this that everybody, pulled together, and there's a real consistency to it, and like I said, for the schedule you were on, the budget that you were on, I think it's a remarkable achievement. I do. I think there's a lot there that works very well. I am going to ask you this: were there any, and keeping in mind the idea of maybe somebody thinking about making their first feature, were there any challenges as you were shooting that came up that you can talk about, and how you overcame them, how you got around them?
I mean, filmmaking, I guess on this scale, a lot of it is just putting out one fire after another.
Yeah.
I mean, there are problems every day, and the bigger it gets, with the less money that you have, the more issues are going to come up, and scheduling, and dropouts, and it's one problem after another. I mean, I totally have advice, I guess, on in a broad sense, but I think there's no telling how many little, you're just fielding ground balls all day long, and you gotta have the grit and the focus to not let it wear you down. If you have the mindset that this will happen no matter what, there's nothing that'll stop this from happening, and you just focus on every problem one at a time, it'll happen, and you I guess you get better as you go along, and get better at solving problems, and staying calm.
Yes.
Is a big thing, There will always be, someone that bails on you, someone who you thought was going to show up and didn't, or some kind of connection that falls through, or some kind of, budgetary issue that you don't know how you're going to solve, and it'll always feel like the end of the world. Maybe for me, maybe that's not everyone, maybe I'm just a naturally anxious person, but that's the real key, I think. It's just learning how to stay calm and cool and collected. I've learned that from a lot of different people over the years, and it's really only something you can get better at through doing, just putting in the reps, doing it over and over again. The whole production design was like one problem after another. It was like, how are we gonna seal off our neighbors' houses so that it isolate? How are we gonna do that? And then you just sit around with your team and you brainstorm till you think, okay, well, we can make a bamboo fence. And it's like, okay, well, where are we gonna get bamboo? We don't have money for it. All right, we'll find an abandoned field by the train tracks and sneak in there every night for an hour with a saw and cut it down one by one, and use our pickup truck to haul it back to the house day after day until it's there. And then you just figure out the process, and you just stay consistent, and you have to show up every day.
Yeah.
And then how are we going to make the house look like an ancient Greek villa? Well, we gotta thatch the roof with hay. How are we gonna get the hay? Well, there's a Christmas tree sale that just ended, and there's a big field of hay that is going to get mowed over anyways. So let's roll up there in the middle of the night with a box of trash bags and bag it all up, and then buy a bunch of twine, or find a bunch of twine, and tie them off bundle by bundle, and then get up on the roof with a staple gun and staple them one after another until you got a thatched roof.
Yeah, this is where, I think improvisation, even on the most carefully planned production, improvisation, being able to think on your feet is so important. improvisation can take many, many different forms in making a movie, and I think there's always an element of it there when you have to, even if it's just at a level of problem solving and coming up with those last minute solutions.
Oh yeah, and there's really no telling, no matter how much you prep. You show up on day one, you get the first setup going, even though you have seen the set come to life and you've worked with the actor for weeks, you get up there and you're watching the monitor, or you're watching it, over the shoulder of the DP, and it's not exactly what you thought it was going to be. You see it taking shape a certain way, and you just follow it. Even if it's not landing to exactly the way you saw it, the film is now its own thing, and your job is to just lead it where it's telling you to go, and let it be itself and find out what it actually is, and go with that and grow. So yeah, a lot of the directing, the actors ended up becoming bigger.
Right.
You play it bigger, and that's just because that was what was working when we were shooting. Even if maybe certain scenes we kind of initially thought of them a little differently, it sort of just goes the way it goes. And yeah, you follow it, and a lot of the solutions to problems are so stupid when it's like, oh, why didn't we think of that, or oh, that's like just so primitive, but it's just gonna take a lot of hours, so time to batten down the hatches and go nonstop 12 hours a day for months.
Yeah.
Maybe that was just the fact of it being a period piece. A lot of these problems are only because of the production design. These are production design. Crew, how to get the crew together and how to get everyone's schedules lined up, and, finding a great producer to work with you so that you can focus on the creative. These are all just, there's endless problems.
They're probably across the board on every production, but like you said, it's the experience to be able to recognize those solutions and put them into practice. Yeah, I think that's probably a good place to wrap up, unless there's anything else that you'd like to add about the film.
No, I mean, I don't think so.
All right.
I think that's about it, I guess. If I could talk to myself before making this, I'd say it's an emotional marathon, and you gotta be ready. And I think, I don't want to say anyone can make a movie, but just sometimes the hardest part is just doing it. It's just getting out of the car and saying, I'm going to do this today.
Yeah.
And I'm going to show up today. And doing that consistently. And just picking a date and sticking to it, and saying this is going to happen. Being that self-starter. That's most of it. And then, find as much money as you can and get a script that you could shoot for that amount of money, and the rest will fall into place, I think.
Well, there you go. Well, you got the movie made, and when this interview is published, we will hopefully be able to let people know where they can see it. I will be sure to share all that information, in the video description here, anywhere else that we post this interview, and hopefully we'll have that soon. So, Jake, thanks for speaking with me today. It was great hearing more about this movie, and congrats again on getting it made.
Thanks, man.